Hello, everyone. It's Emily Teacher here. Today we're going to be reading the story The Ship of the Desert. Picture a long line of camels wending its way slowly across the skyline. This sight was once common in one of the North African and Arabian deserts. The animals are dromedaries, the kind of camel most familiar to people in the West. The Bedouins, the migrant people of the Arabian and Sahara deserts, called the dromedary the ship of the desert. This creature has transported goods and people over some of the most arid regions in the world for thousands of years. So, we're talking about specific types of camels in this story here. Right now, we are introduced to the dromedaries, these animals that go across the Arabian and Sahara deserts, called the ship of the desert. So, let's find out more about them and why they're called like that. Bearing its burden patiently, and seemingly oblivious to hunger and thirst, the dromedary can keep up a steady plodding gait over great distances. It can travel 50 miles a day for up to 5 days without showing signs of fatigue. When it reaches water, it quenches its thirst by drinking as much as 15 gallons at a time. When food is not available, it lives on the fat stored in its hump. The hump is not filled with water, as some people think. The dromedary's hump fills out and is quite prominent when the animal is well fed. It gets smaller as the fat stored inside is depleted. So we know that these animals, the dromedary, they seem very patient, very quiet, and it seems like they don't really get hungry or thirsty. And that's because of the way that its body is made. So when it does drink water, it drinks a lot of water at a time, right? Up to 15 gallons. Um, and if it's fed well, it will have a big hump on its back. And that's where the fat is stored. So when it doesn't have any food, its body will slowly use the fat in the hump, and it will get smaller and smaller as the dromedary gets more and more hungry. And then obviously, the smaller the hump of the dromedary, the more it will need to eat. Let's find out more. The dromedary is very well adapted to life in the desert. Its broad feet do not sink in the soft sand. It can close its nostrils completely during sandstorms, while protecting its eyes with double rows of eyelashes. The dromedary is comfortable in the searing heat of the desert. It will stretch out in the full glare of the noonday sun, even though shade may be available. The dromedary is capable of carrying up to 600 pounds on its back. It knows its limits, though. If given too heavy a burden, it will obstinately refuse to budge until the load is lightened. Okay, so this is why the dromedary is so good in the desert. Its feet are very wide, so it stays on top of the sand. It doesn't have to trudge through the sand like people would. Its nostrils, right, it can close them completely and flutter all the sand away with its double eyelashes. And they're very well suited for the heat. So even during noonday, right, the noonday sun, it means in the middle of the day when the sun is highest in the sky, that's when the heat is the worst. But even during that time, this dromedary can lay down out in the sun. Even if there's shade nearby, it will prefer to stay in the sun. And it can carry very heavy loads, up to 600 pounds, right? This is why it's called a beast of burden, because it is used to carry heavy loads as it goes across the desert. But they can be very stubborn. If you give too much to a camel, to a dromedary, then it will refuse to move until you make it lighter. So let's learn about another kind of camel here. Closely related to the dromedary is the Bactrian camel. Its habitat is the cold desert regions of Siberia and Central Asia. The Bactrian camel is smaller and sturdier than the dromedary. It has shorter legs and is covered with long, shaggy hair. Its coat protects it from the rigorous Siberian climate. But the most obvious difference between the two types of camel is their humps. The dromedary has a single hump. The Bactrian camel has two. Although both kinds have been domesticated for thousands of years, the Bactrian camel, unlike its cousin, is still found in the wild. So here's a different kind of camel that's equipped for a different type of weather, right? So unlike the dromedary, the Bactrian camel is in cold deserts, right? So like Siberia in Central Asia. So there it can get much colder, right? So it's a smaller camel. It has longer hair um, to keep it nice and warm when it's too cold. And the Bactrian camel also has two humps instead of one. So that's a big difference. And this type of camel is also still found in the wild, but the dromedary is not really found in the wild anymore. They're mostly just used by people. To the Bedouins and the migrant people of Central Asia, the dromedary and Bactrian camel are much more than beasts of burden. Their hair provides wool for making clothes and carpets. Their hides, or their skin, can be used to make tents and footwear. They can be milked like cows, and their meat, which tastes like veal or beef, forms an important part of these people's diets. So these camels can be used in many, many different ways for the people who live in these harsh climates. In spite of their great versatility, both kinds of camels are becoming outmoded means of transportation. Four-wheel drive vehicles are more efficient. They can travel faster and further and carry heavier loads. That long line of camels wending its way across the Arabian desert is disappearing from the modern world. Like the American wagon train that headed west in the 1800s, it may someday be seen only in the movies. So these camels are used so much to carry heavy loads and go long distances. But nowadays we have lots of four-wheel drive vehicles, right? We have Jeeps and heavier trucks. We also have ATVs, those kinds of things that can much more quickly get across deserts and carry heavier things. So eventually we may see people stop using camels to do these things, and we might only see it in the movies. Thank you for reading with me today. We do have links that are related to each of the articles. If you want the links related to this video here, you can find it down in the description below.